Hello, my dear student friends. Now we are at session 14. In this session, we are again going to study some of the major poets and their works. Before we begin, let's have a quick recap of what we did in the previous class. In the last class, we studied some of the major poets who made a difference to the post independence Indian English poetry, such as Nissim Ezekiel, Dom Morris, Jayanta Mahapatra, A.K. Ramanujan, and so on. So these are major poets of post independence, and they can be considered as pioneers of modern Indian English poetry. These poets come from different backgrounds. Yes, these poets come from different social, political, even geographical backgrounds. For example, before independence, most of the poets were from West Bengal. But now we have poets in post independence period writing from south, north, east, west, and so on. And the major themes of their poetry is a sense of alienation. So, what is this sense of alienation? Some of the poets, they settled abroad. When they settled abroad, they always suffered from a kind of sense of belongingness. Where do I belong to? Do I belong to India? Do I belong to the country where I'm living right now? So, that sense of belongingness they suffer from, and that can be termed as a sense of alienation. This sense is reflected in the poetry that they wrote. Especially, you notice it in the poems of A.K. Ramanujan. Crisis of identity, self scrutiny, and of course, the social issues of the period. So, these are the major themes of these new poets. Social issues, India had too many social issues. Even today we have. So, their focus was on social issues of the period. Now, the session objective of this session is the same as that of the previous one. You may just have a glance at them. So, these are the session outcomes. You should be able to show your acquaintance with major English poets of the post independence period. You should be able to critically analyze the works and contribution of these poets, and you should also be able to assess the major works of the important poets of this period. So here we begin with the next poet, and that is Kamala Das. Kamala Das was educated mainly in Kerala. She was born in Malabar, and she herself said, speaks three languages, write into, dream in one. So she is again a bilingual writer who wrote both in Malayalam and English. And when she says speaks three languages, I don't know which is the other one. Maybe Hindi. Speaks three languages. Maybe Bengali also. She speaks in three languages, that is, of course, Malayalam, English, and Bengali. Writes in two. She writes in two. It means that she writes in English and Malayalam. Dreams in one. Of course, when she dreams in one, it means it must be her mother tongue. A bilingual writer, she prefers to write poetry in English and fiction in Malayalam. Notice this. Poetry in English, fiction in Malayalam. The literary awards she won include the Asian Poetry Award in 1963 and the Sahitya Academy Award in 1984. Her collections of poems are Summer in Calcutta, 1965, The Descendants, 1967, The Old Playhouse and Other Poems, 1973, and Collected Poems, Volume 1, 1984. So these are her collection of poems. My Story, her autobiography, was published in 1975. So her autobiography is My Story, published in 1975. Kamala Das is essentially known for her bold and frank expression. This is a very important point so far as Kamala Das is concerned. She would, in her expression, you can notice the boldness and frankness. Whatever be the personal things, she expressed them in a very bold and frank manner. An acute obsession with love and the use of confessional mode are the prominent features of her poetry. This is important. So, obsession with love and confessional mode are, when you read her, you feel that she is confessing something before you. That kind of style she employed in her poetry. She has written profusely in Malayalam under the name Madhavi Kutti. See, remember this. Madhavi Kutti is her name whenever she wrote in Malayalam. Against the frustrating emotional experience, guilt, and depression expressed in her autobiography, there is a section of poetry where she writes about the idealized childhood and the nostalgic yearning for her grandmother's Nalpath house, symbolizing freedom, love, and protection. So, these are some of the themes of Kamala Das, and her childhood, yearning for her childhood, yearning for her grandmother. You will definitely notice it when you study a poem by her in the representative poems when we go in the subsequent sessions. So, after Kamala Das, we have Jeev Patel. Jeev Patel was born in 1940 is an important presence in the history of modern Indian English poetry. He is a poet, playwright, and a painter as well as a doctor by profession. See, remember, he is a multidimensional personality again, like Nissim Ezekiel. By profession, he was a medical doctor. Besides that, he was a poet, playwright, and painter. He has written 3 books of poetry: poems, How Do You Withstand, Body, and Mirrored Mirroring. So, these are some of his important works. Here you can notice that one of the collections of poems is Body. This means he himself is a professional doctor, so maybe his medical knowledge is being poured into poetry in his work Body. The enduring concerns in Patel's poetry are the plagued terrain of the human body, its weakness, irrationality, and perishability, the vulgar social inequalities of caste and class that continue to assail post independence India. So, these are some of the major themes. Okay, he dealt with the social issues, and that makes him stand unique among all the poets of his times. When India got freedom from the British rule, there was a general belief that the caste system in India will, over a period of time, get abolished, but it did not happen. So, the continued assail, uh, caste and class that continue to assail post independence India. So, this becomes one of the major themes of his poetry. So, after Jeev Patel, we have one more very important poet, that is Aravinda Krishna Mehrotra. Aravinda Krishna Mehrotra is a poet and a critic of repute. He is the author of 4 books of poems and one of translation. His Oxford India anthology of 12 modern Indian poets has been a significant and influential work in Indian English poetry. Remember this. His Oxford India anthology of 12 modern Indian poets, published in 1992, is a very significant and also influential work in Indian English poetry. In 2009, he was nominated for the chair of Professor of Poetry at the University of Oxford. So, here are some of his important works: Middle Earth, 9 Enclosures, Distance in Statue Miles, The Transfiguring Places, Collected Poems. So these are some of his important works. Now we shall move on to the next poet, that is Adil Jaswala. Adil Jaswala is a poet and critic. He is one of the most influential personalities in the English poetry circle in India. He has written two books of poetry, Land's End in 1962 and Missing Person in 1976. He has edited a seminal anthology of new writing from India in 1974 and co edited an anthology of Indian prose in English in 1977. So, Adil Jaswala has involved in some of the landmark works that are to do with Indian English poetry and prose as well. So his more recent work are The Right Kind of Dog in 2013, Maps for Mortal Moon, Essays and Entertainment in 2014. So these are his latest works. Just do remember them. Now we shall move on to the next poet, that is Pritish Nandi. Pritish Nandi's first book of poems, Of Gods and Olives, was published in 1967. Three further volumes followed in 1960, and a further 14 volumes were published in the 1970s. The Government of India conferred on him the Padma Shri in 1977 for his contribution to Indian English literature. He wrote a new book of poems called Again in 2010 after a long gap. So these are, so far we studied as many as 10 important English poets who wrote after independence. So before we conclude, let's have a quick summary of all that we did so far. So major post-independent poets have a variety of themes and subject matters, or in short, the scope for writing was like never before. So the scope for writing for the new poets is phenomenal. So huge scope for them to write different themes, different issues, play with language, play with technique. So that all made them different from their predecessors. The first major characteristic of the modernists was a rejection of the past. This was suggested in the title of Ezekiel's first book of poems, A Time to Change. So you remember in 1952, Nissim Ezekiel published the book A Time to Change. So the title itself suggests that the new poets would wish to write something different from their predecessors. A whole generation turned to its back on tradition and found itself alienated in the new India. Secondly, they declared themselves opposed to the idealism of romanticism of their predecessors. They wanted poetry which was without escapism and flights of fancy. A poetry written in a clear, hard, unsentimental voice and in everyday language. So this is the kind of new poetry. The language of the new poetry was the language of everyday. So that distinction you can easily notice in the new poems. Thirdly, the poets believed in secular muse. They had little faith in mysticism and other worldly ideologies. Instead, with relish, they introduced a bold new frankness into their poetry. Turning away from religion, they sought meaning and order in personal relationships. So these are the different unique characters of modern poets, and you have studied each of these 10 poets, and also you have studied the works by them. So please do remember all these poets and their works and their contributions. And you also should remember here that you should be well versed with unique characteristics of post-independence English poetry, how they differ from their predecessors. That idea you should have. You should be able to express it. Okay. For any further reference, what you may do is you may just go back to the slides and just try to read the different points which illustrate that the new poets are different from their predecessors. And remembering the names of the works of these poets, especially that of the pioneers of Indian writing in English, is very important from the point of your examination. So before we wind up, let's have a quick quiz now. So the first question is, an acute obsession with love and the use of confessional mode are the prominent features of which of the following poet? Obsession with love and confessional mode of expression, they are the features of which poet? Of course, answer is Kamala Das. Which among the following is the autobiography of Kamala Das? Summer in Calcutta, Her Story, My Story, The Descendants. The answer is C, My Story. I have never considered myself a poet, says who? Answer is Muhammad Iqbal. Oxford India Anthology of 12 Modern Indian English Poets has been a significant and influential work in Indian poetry. Whose work is this? So the answer is D, Arvind Krishna Mehrotra. Whose work is The Right Kind of Dog? Adil Jasuwala, Markande Paranjpe. The right answer is A. So here is the list of references I have made. You can just have a look at them, and for your further reading you can use these references. So with this note we shall conclude this lesson. Thank you very much, and in the next session we shall study the representative poems by these of this period. Okay, thank you.